If someone were to ask you about your guilty pleasures, where would reality TV be on that list? Go on, admit it. There are times when we can live vicariously off the lives of other dysfunctional families from a distance. And a major part of their popularity are those seemingly spontaneous, unexpected reveals or catfights. And in that world, there is one golden rule. The more outrageous it gets, the higher the ratings. But if you think you've seen everything on your favorite shows, think again. The things that happen behind the scenes are sometimes actually wilder and never even make it on screen. Of those unscripted shows, the batshit craziest of them all has got to be Jackass, which launched in 2000 and was so successful it ran for 3 seasons, had several spin-offs, a movie, and several sequels. It was a hit for the juvenile, gross-out, and frankly, dangerous stunts and pranks that the crew pulled. It was every parent's nightmare. And of course, all the kids loved it. And of course, it was an even hotter mess behind the scenes. One classic scene featured pro skateboarder Brandon Novak riding a toilet with wheels down an incline. And even though Brandon knew how to maintain his balance, it ended the way everyone expected it to. A gnarly crash at the bottom. At the time, it was kind of a metaphor for what Brandon had turned into. A former child prodigy on a skateboard, he gained fame and fortune at a very early age when he was sponsored by Gatorade and toured with the official Powell Peralta skateboarding team. But when Brandon joined Jackass, he'd already become the butt of the joke, strung out on heroin and barely keeping it together just to make it to his next fix. Brandon had been a best-selling author and a star. At some point, he had riders in his appearance contracts that stipulated there'd be booze and drugs in his dressing room. And for a while, he was a big enough name to get away with it, appearing almost naked at the MTV Video Music Awards. But he's also been through the ringer. Homeless, dead broke, desperate, and in and out of rehab programs that wouldn't take. And there were definitely days when it didn't even seem like he would make it out alive. So, how did he? Welcome to a special episode commemorating September as National Recovery Month. Launched by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in 1989 to shine a light on mental health and addiction recovery, this month honors and celebrates the success stories of those who've struggled with substance abuse and shows others that recovery is possible. And what better way to do just that than listening to Brandon Novak himself tell us his unforgettable story of his attempts at recovery and sobriety, of resilience and triumph. Today, Brandon dedicates his time helping others overcome drug and alcohol addiction through speaking engagements, interventions, and public appearances. So, in honor of everyone, of us, of people we know and love who are in recovery, let's give a listen to the wild rise and fall and ultimate redemption of Brandon Novak today on the Gratitudeology Podcast.
Will you walk through the fire? Would you ride through the storm? Will you walk on a wire? Will you save me if I fall? Will you break through the madness? Set us down where we're safe. I'll be right here waiting till you find me again.
Welcome, Brandon Novak.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So, before you got the blueprint for living, started off in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your family. I know that you said kind of your dad, it was like an after-school special.
Yeah. My perspective, my outlook. If you would have asked me early on, I would have told you and believed what I said, that it was the most debilitating thing a child should never have to endure. And that was my perspective at that time. But after doing a lot of work on myself, and what I see today is I came from a really good home with a loving family that did the best that they could with what they had. That looked like for me was my father. He was a piece of work. He was the life of the party. He'd light up any room. He'd buy you a drink. He'd cut you a line, and he'd chat with you until the sun came up. And he had the gift of gab, and all the women loved him. He also, was diagnosed with a disease of addiction. And he never worked. He never had a job. He sold a lot of drugs. He grew a lot of drugs. My mother's everything to me now, and always was. She was the second longest employer in Mercy Hospital history. And then I had a brother who wanted to be an attorney. By the time he had passed the bar and he would graduate at law school, he was like blinded and student debt and had no idea what he was going to do next or how to get himself out of that position he had created for himself, which ultimately was a theme that ran in my family, right? Although we endured a lot of things coming up that we shouldn't have been exposed to as a result of my father, his behaviors, and the people he mingled with, we had a good life, right? He did the best that he could with what he had, and he provided as good as a sick person could. I got a skateboard at a very young age, and that skateboard is what raised me. And I was kind of raised in hospitals, a hospital, and she'd be on the third floor in nuclear medicine, and she was the head of her department, and she was kind of running that. And I would just kind of roam from department to department, and everyone was very kind and nice to me and took care of me. And then I would just skateboard in the parking garage all day. I couldn't get enough of that.
How old were you?
7-ish. Yeah. And I was a good skater at a young age. So like the older guys took me under their wing. My mother much preferred me being babysat by a skateboard and people that rode skateboards as opposed to my father and the bikers that he hung with and hanging out in the strip joints and that kind of world. So I never had to like come in when the street lights came on. I never had to like check in and let them know I was good. My mother knew that like I was passionate about something that I had come across to where I would make good decisions.
At what point did you get noticed, and how did that even happen?
When I had received that first skateboard, it wasn't because I had had this newfound respect or love for skateboarding, saw someone doing it in the neighborhood and couldn't wait to do it. I had no idea that it existed. I didn't even care. My sister would live in Ocean City, Maryland during the summer. My mother would sometimes send me down there with her just so she could continue to pursue her career and get me out of my home life with my father. One day I was with her and she stopped by this skate park, which was on 3rd Street, to talk to some guy. The guy turned out to be a professional and he just gave me his skateboard. That moment that board touched my hand, like I knew that that's what I was going to do. And I remember for some reason, my father would not let me skateboard until I got a helmet, which he cared about that, ironically enough. But we didn't have a helmet, but we had this big in-ground pool out back, and I had those like floaties that kids put on their arms. So my father made like this makeshift helmet and shoved that floaty on my head, and then he allowed me to skate, which was so weird. But
that's crazy.
So they came together, and that was it, man. And I never looked back. And I started it in the beginning initially because I loved it. I was passionate about it, and then later on, I did it because it gave me a reprieve from a rather fucking traumatic home life with a lot of things going on.
At 14 is when you were discovered, right?
Yeah,
so tell me about that.
So there was this other pro skater out of Baltimore named Bucky Lasik. Bucky had kind of noticed that I was this kid who had great potential. And he was my idol. I'd emulate him. I'd dress like him. I'd skated like him. And so Bucky then continues to take me under his wing. I'm entering a lot of contests. I'm winning them. My name's starting to make its rounds. And then Bucky is professional for Pal Peralta at the time. Bucky then gets me sponsored by Pal. At first, flow, like meaning they would just give me product, but really didn't recognize me as a team rider. Then they sponsored me for the wheels, and then I became a full-blown team rider for PAL. And at that point, I'm then traveling the world, and I'm staying at Tony Hawk's house in the summer and filming these video parts. And like, I had arrived in that world, and I had never been happier. And if you would have, told me that tomorrow was going to be my last day on this earth, I would have been the happiest child to have ever walked this earth, because I had achieved everything I'd ever wanted.
From there, things were going into hyperspeed for Brandon. Sports drink brand Gatorade was already in the mainstream through football and tennis, but they wanted an in on the youth demo through extreme sports. And they had their eyes on skateboarding. And who better to be the face of that world than young Brandon?
I had happened to be the skateboarder that they picked. So I'm now in this world that is like larger than life. They're flying me to Chicago, to at the time the Quaker Oats building where they made Gatorade, and they're taking me into these different laboratories, and they're doing these different studies on all these different people. And we're then that night going to Jordan's Steakhouse, where he accompanies us for dinner, and I'm filming this commercial in the park.
To see young Brandon around this time, skateboarding with the pros, head on over to our companion Instagram account at Gratitudeology.
The very next morning, I remember it was St. Patrick's Day, and I look out of my hotel, and the whole river is green. And this is just at such a young age, and I just did it because I was passionate about it, and it gave me refuge and peace from a lot of chaotic things that were going on under my roof. But if I do it because I love it, I'm passionate about it, and I believe in it, that finances are a byproduct of the love of the, and that's what continued to happen with skateboarding throughout the rest of my life.
As so often happens when young people make big money, things eventually start to go sideways. They become exposed to debauchery and the seedier side of life, and they don't have the emotional maturity to know how to deal with that. Not to mention, with Brandon's family history of addiction, when drugs were inevitably offered, he didn't stand a chance.
I believe I was genetically predisposed. Yeah. My brother, my sister, who are by a different father, my mother, can take it or leave it. That paired with the upbringing that I was raised in, paired with the lack of accountability or responsibility for my actions, and because I had a method to my madness, at least what most thought, from a very young age, by the time I'm 17 and a full-blown heroin addict, I had drifted so far out to sea that I was like unhelpable at that point, because people said, he's done so good to this point, I highly doubt he would make these really foolish decisions now. So as any good addict does, once my disease gets bigger than I realize, but more importantly can control, I start to do what any addict does. I isolate, I disconnect, I disassociate. And at that point, it's becoming the norm.
For those of us who've been there, this is the point when one can be a functioning addict. It's a tale as old as time. When it comes to famous people with a lot of money, you can get by with some questionable behavior because people assume, oh, he's a success, he must know what he's doing. And for a time, Brandon got by on that. It was then he met another fellow skateboarder who would become an important part of his life.
At 14, 15, we're going to this skate park where I meet Bam.
What's up, this is Bam Margera with Brandon Novak, and we're going to be showing you the castle.
We talk, we look, we dress alike. We skate the same way. We're consistent skaters. We're contest skaters. Instantaneously, we gravitate to each other, and we become thick as thieves best friends. Every year, we'd practice for this one particular contest in Bricktown, New Jersey, called the NSAs, National Skateboarding Associations. And either he would win or I would win. Now, at this point, he's getting sponsored. He's starting to rise up the ranks. And one year, he shows up to the contest. This is literally within a year span. I don't show up. So Bam says to Bucky, "Where's Novak?" And Bucky says to Bam, "I think he's on heroin." Bam's response is, "What's that?" Right? He's so young that he doesn't even know what that means. I was at this contest the year before, killing it, like really doing the deal and still having the career as that promising young skateboarder that's going to be somebody, to I've now decided to pursue a career in heroin and neglect my responsibilities, right? Avoidance at all costs. Bam continues to rise the ranks, becomes a household name. He makes the CKY videos, which net him his first million, which then turns into Viva La Bam, then into Jackass. You know, because for me, and again, I think most addicts and alcoholics, the only time I'm going to accept responsibility or accountability for my actions is when my back's against the wall, right? Like, that's the only time you might get the truth out of me, that maybe I have a problem, or just appeasing you and going to said facility to get you off my back so I can prove to you that I can drink or drug responsibly, right? Because that's the goal.
Sure.
But unfortunately, I'm just so unaware and ill-equipped of the reality of my disease that I have. And I wake up tomorrow to repeat yesterday's actions, and I'm stuck in Groundhog's Day for like 22 years.
At that point, it was becoming apparent that he was no longer a functional addict, and everyone around him knew it.
I was on the phone with my team captain from Palo Peralta, and he was giving me an ultimatum. He said, look, Novak, we can send you into treatment. You can save your life. You can continue to skate for Palo Peralta, or you can quit the team. Now, from 7 to 17, I ate it. I breathed it. I slept it. I dreamt it. I had fucking become it. Like, $1 billion couldn't equate the internal joy that I had possessed about my life. And I'm now, for the very first time, being presented with an opportunity that is ultimately going to stand between me and what was holding me captive, which was my addiction. And I didn't know this then, but I know this now, that anything, any person, any place, or anything that would attempt to get between me and a drink or a drug must and will fucking go. And it's never personal, it's just business. Because I'm really a good guy who was raised with morals and values, but this is just business. Don't take it personal. So he, offers me this opportunity. I don't have a breath of fresh air in my lungs when I said, you know what, Todd, I quit. And then I go celebrate quitting by getting high. So 2 months later, my mother and my girlfriend come to me with the same opportunity. And what would make you think that I would accept it from them over my team captain from Palo Peralta? And the reason why I'm really focusing on that is because I would love for the people to understand the disconnection from reality that takes place far, far, far before I even have any idea that it's happening. And I think about it for a second. I said, you know what? That's an amazing idea. That's a great idea. I have this newfound freedom I was not expecting, because I'm no longer going on tour. I'm not filming. I'm not skating. I'm just resigned to being a drug addict. And I have this time. I'm going to report to said program, and I'm going to report back to you two why I'm not these fucking nut jobs, nor will I ever be. After all, these people are my father. That's how I see them. So fuck you. I want no part. At that time, I hadn't come to terms with or made amends with my father, who's no longer with us. But I was, if you can tell, I was really resentful at that man. Yeah. So nonetheless, I accept this opportunity. And as quick as I accept it, there's like this bag that appears out of nowhere. It was magically packed. And I'm in the back of my mother's car. My girlfriend's up front, and they drop me off. They leave. And I'm standing in front of this facility, a bright, young 17-year-old kid in Baltimore City. And I'm met outside by a very kind, endearing older woman. And she said, "Sweetheart, are you Mr. Novak?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Come with me." And she takes me to this cafeteria. And in this cafeteria, it is completely empty. There is not a soul in sight. She said, "Wait here, sweetheart. I'll be back." And I fucking lug my bags in. And at this time, I'm withdrawing from heroin. I'm like ill as a research monkey. I'm detoxing from heroin. I have nothing there. These very similar, bright interrogation style lights shining down on me. And I'm like, ugh. And I'm sitting there, and out of nowhere, this older black gentleman walks into this completely empty cafeteria, and he walks directly up to me. And he said, "White boy, what are you doing here?" I said, "Heroin." He said, "How old are you?" I said, 17. He said, "Do yourself a favor and do not turn 18 in a place like this." And as quick as he came, he left. He nor I had no idea the significance that simple conversation was ever going to have on me. I successfully completed that treatment center. I did. And when I completed it, the very first thing that crossed my mind is, how dare that old fucking fool of a man think that he could dictate what my future could look like. Fuck him and fuck the rest of these people. Because as an addict, if you haven't picked up on it yet, as an addict or an alcoholic, all that means is that I'm defiant by nature. I hate authority and I refuse to conform. Because I don't know about most people, but I possess this special job that places me in a lot of positions I don't like to be in, and it allows me to feel a lot of feelings I don't like to feel. And the job consists of knowing everything. So when people, politely suggest what I could ultimately do to save my life, I politely suggest why they should fuck off. So I'm like as delusional as one could get. And I don't turn 18 in a place like that, but ultimately turn 19, 20, 22, 24, 26, 27, 29, 32, 34, 35, 37, 38 in a jail or a treatment center. And every year I'd sit on whatever bed of whatever facility I happen to be in or whatever jail I happen to be incarcerated in and think back to that older gentleman and say that maybe if I just would have listened to that man with an open mind and an open heart, I would not continuously create these outcomes for myself.
Brandon would suffer continued relapse and sink even deeper into his addiction. He went back to his old habits of withdrawing, disassociating, isolating. It seemed like no one could help. Little did he know, help was just around the corner, and it would come in the form of a familiar face.
So Bam continues to excel. He just, he's doing like Wheaties commercials. He's just become this household name. And one day in Baltimore, I'm homeless. I'm prostituting my body to secure finances to acquire more heroin during the day. I'm sleeping in an abandoned house at night, and I steal for a living to get money to support my addiction. One day, I woke up real early, and I just couldn't get any money. I couldn't come up with any money, and I'd steal some stuff, but no one would buy it. And I'm just not getting anywhere. I'm really sick. And remember, at this point now, I look at skateboarding as the love of my life that I allowed to get away. Just imagine that pain, and that's what I feel like tenfold. And so I wouldn't even look at a skateboard. If someone skateboarded down the street, I'd look the other way. I'd avoid a skate shop by all means necessary. But on this day, times were really tough. And I decided I was going to do what I had never done before. And I walked into this area in Baltimore called Fells Point. And I walked into a skate shop where, of course, the people knew who I was and I knew them. And I made up a lie and I asked to get some money. And they saw right through it. And they said, look, we're not going to give you any money, Novak. But Bam was here yesterday on tour, and he asked if we ever saw you, and we said no, we never do, because at that point they never had. And he said, well, if you see him, give him my number and let him know that if he wants to get off heroin and start skating again, I'll help him. Timing and alignment is everything in this world to me. And I believe everything happens exactly when it's supposed to. I take the number, I leave. I don't call that night. Now, mind you, this is years back when cell phones aren't a thing yet, but pay phones are. And I have 50 cents in my pocket, which at the time was like $1,000 or whatever. It was my lifeline. I had no money. And I take this 50 cents and I pump it in the machine and I call him and I have my finger on the thing because if the machine picks up, I can't lose the 50 cents. And again, he did not give me his home phone number. He left me the number to a skate shop in Westchester, Fairman's. And Dave Fairman answers the phone. And I said, hey, this is Novak. I'm looking for Bam. Now, this is just a skate shop. The chances of him being in are slim to none. I only have 50 cents. This is a one-shot take. And he goes, Bam was just here. He's next door at Kuma eating. Hold on, I'll go get him. If he would have hung up, I probably would have never called that number back. He put the phone down. He ran next door, got Bam from the sushi restaurant, back at Fairman's. And that night, Bam had bought me a Greyhound bus ticket, and I'm on a Greyhound bus from Baltimore to Philly. Cut to Bam allowing me to live in his house, and I could have a credit card, I could use a car, I could be on Viva La Bam, I could get paid, but the only rules were is I could not do any form of opiates or benzos, meaning I couldn't eat Xanax, I couldn't eat Valium, I couldn't do heroin. I couldn't take Percocets, and everyone was well aware of that. Because at this time, no one really understood addiction or alcoholism, and none of them suffered at that point with this disease yet. So to them, it was okay if I did cocaine and I drank because it's socially acceptable. I don't steal your shit while under the influence. I know without really knowing that it's going to be short-lived. I know that it's only a matter of time before I burn these bridges to the ground as well. Because although I don't want to lie to Bam, who's given me this opportunity that most would die for, I can't wait to steal a car, to steal some money, to steal products, to get back to Baltimore City, to get more heroin.
Brandon was in a weird place. With Jackass as the backdrop, outrageous behavior was celebrated. So even though Bam had tried to save him from his addiction, he had also accidentally dropped him into the middle of a world of landmines. In a place where outrageous behavior was cultural currency, Brandon's addiction played a starring role.
While filming these shows, Bam was always so amused with the stories that came along with my addiction. The positions it put me in, the people it put me around, so much so that we would shoot, we would rap for the day, the cast and the crew would go to it'd be a table of 30, and Bam would be like, yo, tell this story, tell that story, and I'd start to tell these stories, and you could hear a pin drop. And then finally one day he's like, yo, you're going to write a book. There's now new rules. In order for you to live in this house, to be on this show, to have a car, to use a credit card, and to receive a paycheck, I'm going to give you a pen and a paper, a notebook and a pen. He said, you're to carry this around. I don't even need to see you writing with it, but the first time I do not see it in your hand, you're going back to Baltimore. Don't get caught without it, or don't have it in my hand, get caught, get kicked out, and go back to letting men blow me for heroin. It's a real simple decision to make. So I'm like, fuck it. So I start writing this book out of necessity to not be homeless again. Someone had given me A Million Little Pieces by James Frey. Shout out to James Frey. He's the guy who gave birth to Dream Seller. He's a dear friend of mine now. I love him to death. But I loved his book. I couldn't get enough of it. And written in 12 chapters. So I write mine in 12 chapters. And after I finish the 12 chapters, it takes me about a year. I take it to Bam. Bam reads it. He's like, fuck, there's something here. And he then tasks Joe Franz to be my co-author. Joe Franz is a professor. He was a filmer. He filmed for Viva La Bam and Jackass, and he created CKY videos, which were the first thing that got us on the map. And when Bam said to Joe, I need you to write this book with him, he's like, please, no. Again, like my father, my behavior was erratic and sporadic, and you never knew who you were going to get at any given moment. So ironically, the man who I hated and couldn't stand the most, I had become a spitting image of. But nonetheless, Joe, not really having a say-so in the matter because he wanted to keep his jobs, took on this position. So Joe turns 12 chapters into 32 chapters. I write it pen to paper. He puts it together. He types all this stuff. Bam makes his manager at the time get me a literary agent. My literary agent shops the manuscript around. Tons of no's, a couple yeses, and we come to an agreement with Kensington Publishers, Citadel Press. I definitely had no idea at the time what was transpiring. And what I've learned throughout my journey is that, in retrospect, life is live forward and learn backwards. I just could not piece together or place the events that landed in this outcome. So I'm initially brought onto the show as, I think the first name Bam gave me was Heroin Novak. MTV and those guys over there weren't too keen on that name popping up on the screen every time I entered. So it settled with Nudie Novak because I was always naked. But I was that guy who was a known drug addict who just didn't care about anything and did whatever with whoever, whenever. So everything was largely documented, whether it was through the books, through the press.
Even though this moment, as a cast member on a hit show, felt like the first time Brandon had gained anything close to stability, yes, I'm doing air quotes with my fingers right now, deep down, he knew it wouldn't last.
We're scheduled to go on tour to Australia. Bam and everyone had kind of had enough of me. I had enough of me, but I was just surviving at best and just pulling at strings and hoping they didn't break. And this tour to Australia, the majority of the people did not want me on the tour. Bam doing what Bam always did, which was always like, bring me along, despite what people were saying. You know, throughout the whole career of Bam, my relationship, his mother, his father, his friends would say, stop fucking with Novak. Leave Novak alone. He's only going to hurt you. He's only going to lie to you. He's only going to steal from you. And which is true, because I had this disease that totally it made a really good person make terrible decisions daily. But nonetheless, we're leaving the following morning. I show up the night before, and I am so high. I'm like really high. And as soon as I walk through the door, he looks at me and he's like, nope, get out. Get out. And it was at that moment that I get out, and now, because I had burnt all my resources and no one in Pennsylvania in Westchester is helping me anymore. At this point, people felt it was best, and if they did love me, they had to do it from a distance. And I didn't have anyone like, if Bam was willing to do it, then there'd be a few more people that were willing to do it. But once he said no, like the majority of people said no too. They were only dealing with me on the strength of him. So when he said no, I was like, fuck.
Okay, let's pause for a moment and address the elephant in the room here. Up to this point in the story, Bam has been painted as the hero, because he was Brandon's hero for a very long time, and undoubtedly he did a lot to try and save Brandon from himself. However, if you're at all tuned in to entertainment news or the hottest gossip channels on YouTube, then you probably know where Bam's story ended up.
Bam Margera has reportedly been removed from the cast of Jackass 4.
Police were called to the Pecopson Township property called Castle Bam around 11 Sunday morning for a domestic case. When they got there, police were told former pro skateboarder and Jackass star Bam Margera had taken off through the woods behind the property.
So I saw a video of you, and people characterize it as ranting and raving and whatever. But what you said in this...
When you've been through what I've been through, yes, it is a rant because I have a lot to say.
That's right. Bam, too, would succumb to drug and alcohol dependency. It's a slippery slope, as I know all too well. Even more so when you're rich and famous. But at this time, back in Australia, Bam was still reasonably holding it together, while Brandon was clearly not.
And I go back to Baltimore, and my mother kind of believes in me because I was on TV like last week. So she's holding on to that notion that maybe I haven't reverted back to the guy that was homeless who left some years ago. And in no time, my mother serves me with a restraining order to be removed from her house because I'm upstairs in her bedroom. I put her out of her bedroom. She now sleeps on the sofa in the living room directly next to the front door because I don't leave that room for 3 months, except for once in the morning to go buy a whole bunch of heroin and cocaine, to then get back to that room and just shoot speedballs all day while chain smoking. And my mother's in fear that if I'm shooting heroin while chain smoking in the bedroom upstairs, I usually fall asleep in the process. I'll drop the cigarette. The house will catch on fire. My attorney brother, the one that works in the White House, came down one day and saw the conditions that I was forcing my mother to live in, basically. And with that, they called the police and then drafted up the paperwork, and a restraining order was served against me. So now I'm a 38-year-old homeless heroin addict who had like a best-selling book sold in every national bookstore across the world, in these movies that broke box office records, on these shows that were wildly successful. Now I'm roaming the streets of Baltimore again. Swallow that with the ego. I'm sleeping in this park, and everything that I own consists of 8 scarves, 2 jackets, 3 socks, a stick of deodorant. It all fits into this bag that doubles as my pillow that I use in the park, which I still have in my home today. It's a very special thing that I keep near to me. A needle, a spoon, and a restraining order. And I wake up one morning and there's like this rat on my chest. And I want to kill myself at this point on a daily basis. God, do I want to kill myself. But I'm terrified to hurt myself in the process. So I'm stuck in this weird purgatory place And no matter how much heroin I shoot, I'm terrible at suicide because I keep fucking waking up. And then one day I don't wake up, and I end up on life support. And now I'm back on life support at the hospital that at the time my mother is on the board of. What became a bi-weekly, if not monthly occurrence, what my family reunions would look like is I'd end up in the emergency room, the very same hospital that raised me. I'd jump around from department to department, and everyone loved me, and everyone would give me a donut, and they thought I was so cute because I'd just carry my skateboard throughout. Now looks like them calling up to third floor and saying, Pat, your son's back. And by back, meaning I had overdosed and I'd been brought in on a stretcher and hit with Narcan. But this time I made it up to ICU and I'm on life support. They flirted with the notion of pulling the plug because I didn't look like I was making any improvement. And my mother came in and she said, that's my son, you will never do that. And I swear to God, the very next day I came to. And then I attempted to board a flight to Fort Lauderdale because I get my phone, I look in the DMs, and there's this woman who said she had read my book, my first book, and it had saved her life. She said, would you be willing to come to Fort Lauderdale? And I said, yes. I need some heroin, some cocaine, some Xanax, and some wine. She was paying for everything. She was paying for the flight. She was paying for the food, the boarding. Most importantly, she was paying for the drugs. And I look into it a bit more, and she lives in a hotel. It's not a good look either. And then my book saved her life, but she's going to give me substances that kill mine. And then I find out she's like a lady of the night or a dancer. And two things I have no problem with because I've seen me become both of those. But she had two requirements that I must fulfill when I touched down in Fort Lauderdale. When I got there, she wanted to party and she wanted to fuck. And I don't know about anyone out there, but when I do heroin, I do neither. I sleep. So I knew I was going to wear my welcome out like really, really fast. And I didn't want to go because I knew that like it was going to end terribly bad. I had this notion. It's hot, sandy. I don't know the hustles. It's really far away from anything familiar to me. And God knows I don't want to go. But she has the heroin, she has the cocaine, she has the Xanax. So the disease that I possess basically says to me, when I want to know how you feel about something, I'll ask. But until then, bitch, shut the fuck up and get in this line at this airport and you get your pretty ass on that fucking flight, right? Like, because I don't know about, again, anyone out there, and I know that I'm very direct and I'm very forward, but that's the reality of the disease that I am diagnosed with, and I keep that very close to me. I don't get caught up in the accessories of fancy wordplay because at the end of the day, I'm an accessories whore anyways, and I'll get lost, right? I'll get diverted from my primary purpose, and it usually comes by way of like money, property, prestige, like all these things that will divert me from what my agenda is, which is to just simply stick to the basics and stay sober one more day. Telling you, my heart was beating out of my chest. I had done this a billion times before. I just wasn't okay with it, and I get to the counter. There's two things I've learned throughout my career that have never been wrong, and that's that you can never win an argument with a judge or a TSA airport security agent, right? Like what they say goes. It's not a question, it's a statement, and there's no room to revisit. Yeah. And I get to the counter, and the woman takes one look at me, and she said, Mr. Novak, are you under the influence of anything? And I say, absolutely not. And she said, I believe that you are. You will not fly for 3 days. And that's insane. Not like the next flight tonight or tomorrow morning. 3 fucking days. And usually when I'm giving a talk, I open it up with this part where on May 25th, which was the last day I got high, the God of my understanding showed up and she created just a big enough gap between me and the last speedball that I stuck into my arm to allow me to have that moment of clarity to see what my life really looked like was. And for the first time in my life, I was unaccepting of this outcome that I, becoming accountable for my actions, continuously created for myself year after year. This was that moment. That woman who was refusing me access to this flight was simply my higher power dressing up in the form of a TSA airport security agent and doing for me what I was incapable of doing for myself because my addiction said, bitch, get on that fucking flight. And I got out of line. And I called my sponsor then, this fella named Lex, who lives in Westchester as well. And I said, Lex, I'm stranded at BWI Airport. I want to kill myself. And he said, no, you're going to get on a train. You're going to come back to 30th Street Station in Philadelphia. And at my very last treatment center, number 13, when I walked in, before I even arrived there, I knew things were going to be different. Why? Because I started looking back at every experience I had to that point in trying to obtain sobriety and recognizing that everything that those people told me, back to where we started, and these blessings were going to happen unbeknownst to me. Because on that final van ride to my final facility, God willing, May 25th, 2015, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I haven't even entered detox yet, that I am the common denominator in every one of my problems. And maybe if I just get the fuck out of my way, I might stand a chance, right? Like, I started to become accountable for my actions as a direct result of the repercussions from my addiction that I always underestimated the whole time because I possessed that job that consisted of knowing everything, right? Like, I started to dot the I's and cross the T's, and I'm like, I get it. That aha moment. The funny thing is, that was my very first facility that I literally only went to prove that I didn't belong at. And little did I know, the most profound statement that was so simple, so matter-of-factly delivered to me right in my face, I fucking missed it. I didn't even see it, and it held to be the strongest, biggest seed that created the foundation of my recovery today. And it was just in passing. And that's why, you know, again, I'm just going all over, but that's why I decided to create my own establishment that I believe in, because I don't like when people say, oh, it's a failure, it's a waste of time, this guy's never going to get it. Fuck you. People said that about me, and now, you know, I guarantee you my mother's grateful for every person that gave me an opportunity, because I wasn't buried in that plot that she bought me that has my name on it. Mm-hmm. You know, like, it's all perspective. And
so she bought you a plot.
Yeah, it's still there. She bought two, one for her and one for me, because she was in fear that if she died, who would take care of her son? So since then, I've decided I'll be cremated, and so has he, and so has she. So we have two plots for sale in Baltimore City, which I'm trying to sell to then take the money to provide scholarships.
To make an impact with young people, Brandon released a graphic novel called The Brandon Novak Chronicles, the shocking true addiction stories of a counterculture icon, and then a second tell-all entitled The Streets of Baltimore, to mark his 5-year anniversary of his sobriety. Today, he is 9 years sober and thriving. Looking back, he's determined to make up for lost time.
So my life was just consumed with skateboarding. Skateboarding, it's all I cared about. It's all I loved. It's all I thought about. And then it went from that directly to heroin. Like, there was no women, there was no school dances, there was no sports or play. Like, it went from skateboarding to heroin. So I missed out on so much in life. So much so that when I got sober, I'm 45 now. I got my first ever driver's license at 41. I just learned how to do laundry when I was 40, living in a sober house. I had no idea. It's just so disconnected from reality. I was playing catch up really late in life, and I had a lot to catch up on.
Since the world of recovery gave Brandon not only a second lease on life, but all the life skills he had been lacking, once he was fully on his feet, he decided to pay it back, opening several treatment centers and sober living facilities.
I own a drug and alcohol treatment center called Redemption Addiction Treatment Center in Wilmington, Delaware. And that's coupled with 7 men's and women's recovery homes with 75 beds. I've devoted my life today to helping people who are where I once was. And that's what's so frustrating now, because, you know, in the field, owning treatment centers, owning sober living houses, sponsoring people, somewhat successful to an outsider's perspective, it entitles me to think that I have a good idea of what's going on sometimes and what's best for people. I run groups every day at my facility, and I'm working with men, women, and I see the good in them, and I try to save them from experiencing their own process. And I have to remember, if anyone would have robbed me of my process, one less night of homelessness, one less night of making my mother cry herself to sleep, I very well may not be the man who I am today, who now has the ability to provide help to countless others. And it's all God. It's like my fucking poisoning has become my medicine. And that only works in this weird magical realm called recovery that us weirdos do. It looked completely different than it did then. You know, what happened was I had a spiritual experience. And the definition of a spiritual experience is simply a psychic change. Meaning that I, Brandon Novak, today no longer look, act, or think the way I did then when I was trying to board that plane to Fort Lauderdale to live with a stripper and shoot heroin by day and cocaine by night. I've been completely rewired. I not only act differently, more importantly, I react differently. My life is very monotone. From an outsider's perspective, they'd be like, wow, it's crazy. So I'm here today. I fly to Fort Lauderdale tomorrow. I've now been blessed with the ability to have a place in Boca where I take my mother regularly and provide her, you know, that happy ending, that carefree life. Again, only in this magical world do things like this happen, but I'm just as consumed today by drugs and alcohol that I was then. The only difference is it provides me an amazing life today, and I don't partake in using them. Right? Like,
Right.
I wouldn't have it any other way. Two things that I love more than anything in this world was skateboarding and my addiction. And today I get to do both of them, like, a lot. Besides all that, I've been blessed with this internal peace you couldn't put a price tag on. I've become a son to my mother. I've become a brother to my brother and sister. I went to my nephew's graduation at Cornell 2 months ago, and then he came and interned for me at my facility, and I was the guy that, you know, whose brother, which was his son who graduated from Cornell, whose brother made my mother get that restraining order against me because, like, everyone thought it was best to love me from a distance. To today, my attorney brother from the White House saying, hey, can my kid get an internship with you? And I've become like this cool uncle, and I've found this lust for life that I didn't know existed. I care about what I eat. I work out 5 days a week, 3 with a trainer. You know, I just have a really beautiful life. And the beautiful thing about life is that the longer I stay sober and the more that I learn, the knowledge and information that I acquire, the more I know that I don't fucking know about much. And I'm not really responsible or in charge for much. I just kind of keep a really tight relationship with my higher power and just do the right thing for the right reason.
Tell me about how service keeps you sober and grateful.
I can sum it all up in a really quick sentence, right? And this is it. I came in to recovery as a king, and I worked my way up the ladder to become a humble servant. Right? I walked into sobriety. I'm the fucking man. I am this. You owe me this. I'm entitled to this. And then once I got into the work, I literally worked my way up the ladder to become a humble servant and couldn't ask for anything more.
I have to say, when it comes to flying high, then crashing and burning, then building it all back together again, there are few that can speak to this louder than Brandon Novak. And for National Recovery Month, Brandon is just the kind of inspiration we all need to hear. And not just as a cautionary tale, because as he himself keeps saying, we all have our stories, but it's what you do with your story that's going to make a difference in your life. Hey, Brandon specifically asked us to mention this, so listen up. If there's anyone out there needing help with drugs or alcohol, you can contact him directly at 610-314-6747. If you want to learn more about Brandon, find out where to buy his books, or learn more about his recovery centers, head over to brandonnovak.com. And to follow his adventures on Instagram, check him out at Brandon_Novak. That's all for today. Remember, if you like what you heard, if it impacted you in any way, and if you think it's a message other people in your life might like to hear, I'd be so grateful if you'd give me 5 stars, leave a quick little comment. Those things really help. And share this podcast with your friends, either on social media or just word of mouth. I'm on a mission for us all to help each other focus on expanding our attention towards what's good in the world rather than focusing on what's bad, one person at a time. If we all did that, even to our own little sphere of influence, the world has the potential to be a much more radically awesome place. Stick with me, friends. I've got your back. We're in this together, and it's a great day to see the greatness in the day. See you next time. The Gratitudeology podcast is written, executive produced, and hosted by me, Jamie Hess. Sound design and studio production by Gotham Production Studios. Our theme song is Maze by Hills, sung by Nadia Ali. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Gratitudeology.
Will you walk through the fire? Would you ride through the storm? Will you walk on a wire? Will you save me if I fall? Will you break through the madness? Set us down where we're safe. I'll be right